Shalom. This is part 3 of a 3-part presentation on looking at SHIURIM lectures in sort of a different way. Since part 3 is the longest part 1 was 6.5 minutes, part 2 was about 10.5 minutes, I'm going to divide part 3 into parts A, B, and C. It makes it easier to upload when we're ready to distribute these presentations. So in part 2, I mentioned, by the way, some ways of contacting me. After this whole presentation, I would think some of you may want to reach out to me to ask me questions, etc. And so feel free to do so. And in that video, I've mentioned a number of ways: email, phone, etc., ways of contacting me. I hope these presentations are helpful. I hope to Be'ezus Hashem to help us rethink and refocus the way we give shiurim and divrei Torah. Now, the major premise of my talk thus far is that people walk away with very little by merely listening to a talk. Moreover, and perhaps even more serious, is that people may walk away with misinformation, misinterpreting what a speaker spoke about. And the reason for that is most people are not very good auditory learners. Most people don't learn by simply listening without being actively engaged. And therefore they need to be engaged. And that's the thrust of my point in these presentations. Now, I began talking about 10 ways of engaging participants in a shiur, in a lecture, in a talk, in a Devar Torah. So the first way was what was called think, pair, and share. By posing a question, having them think about it, then turning to a neighbor, a partner, and sharing information, talking to each other about a concept or a question that was just mentioned in a talk. And then the presenter can then follow up by listening to what they said, and if they got the idea that the presenter was trying to communicate. So that's one way of engaging them, by doing a little mini chevrusa, so to speak. A second way is called pre-reading assignment, and that is give them, we talked about Mar Makomos, and that's wonderful, and usually it's a page long, 2 pages long. They follow along. They're not really engaged to the degree which they are participating. They're just following along. Again, they're listening and watching. But it's very helpful to have it. But what I'm suggesting now is a pre-reading assignment that you may want to give them before the session begins. And this can happen actually before the session, during the session, or near the very end of the session, where the presenter gives them some focused questions to think about, or pose a case study. What would you do in this case? Let's say it's carrying on Shabbos, Kalach Hayad, or whatever it is, and have them think about it. By having them think about this before, you're more likely to engage them. You're more likely to have caught their interest by following what you have to say in response to that case or those questions. Okay. A third technique is creating visual depictions, creating a visual. Most people are visual learners. So I've seen someone actually give daf yomi by actually, during the talk, holding up a piece of paper and actually have the Shachar V'Tarya laid out in like big blocks. Abaye said this, here's a shita, Rava said this, and here's how the machlokas continues. Having a visual presentation is very, very important, and if to the extent to which you can present your ideas visually, it is very helpful to engage them. Another idea is called a mini group learning. Instead of getting together with a chevrusa with 2 people, or think, pair, and share, get together a group of 3 or 4 people, similarly, around a problem. Let's say it's in the middle of your talk, and you've just explained, the concept. or you may have discussed psik resha and groma. In what cases a groma with a psik resha is mutter. Now those are not easy concepts, but if you engage them in a group and allow them to share ideas, you're engaging them, and they're more likely to have a deeper understanding, with of course feedback, which we'll talk about later on, and they're more likely to walk away with understanding and having a better focus on what the concept you were trying to convey. Another technique is called the 1-minute paper. Now, I generally like to give the 1-minute paper at the end of a talk, but it can be given in the middle. For example, I've spoken for the last 20 minutes. Let's pause for a moment. On a piece of paper, write down the fuzziest idea thus far, meaning what's the one thing that's still unclear to you? You may ask them a question about a content that you've covered. Well, I explained this concept. Now, do me a favor, define it. Now, you can collect these anonymously. They don't have to write their names on it. And I usually do this at the end of a talk, where I then walk away with, they leave, and I have these like 20 papers from the 20 participants, and they tell me what's unclear, what they would like to know more about, and if they really understood my talk. It's a way of engaging them. It's also a way of feedback. And by the way, one of the ideas is that one of the ways of engaging them can also be a feedback mechanism. Remember, we mentioned that feedback is the third critical component of these ideas, because by just engaging them without giving them feedback, they still may walk away with misinformation. So it's important to give somebody feedback. Another quick one, and I'll end this part A with this technique, is called the thumb up, thumb down, or thumb sideways. In the middle of a talk, you just explain the concept, and you ask the audience, okay, if you got it, if you understand what I just said, go like this. If you're not unsure, go like this. If you're unclear completely, go like this. Now, by doing that, you don't really know if they're telling the truth, but you do get a sense of them being actively engaged by responding to your question, and at a glance, excuse the pun, that's my name, glance. At a glance, you can look around the audience and see how many thumbs up, how many thumbs down, how many sideways. And if you have a lot of sideways or down, rather than continue your lecture, your talk, you may want to review or give more examples to clarify the concept. End of part 3A.